Am I Horimo? Welcome to the ordinary meeting of Council this morning. Apologies. I see why I was leaving them. I'm not quite sure why that was, but I'm not. I think we're all here or online. Yeah. So at this stage, Amy, I would like to introduce a new member of staff. So, Amy.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. I would just like to take this opportunity to introduce you to Tanya. Tanya is going to be joining us as our new Risk Assurance and Internal Audit Officer. Tanya joined on Monday, so she's very much in the early stages of her induction with us, but will be working with me in the commercial area and working with the Opec committee moving forward. So just wanted to introduce you. And
Kia ora, everybody. Nice to meet you. Welcome, Tanya.
Welcome.
thank you.
Move to item 3, declarations of interest. I haven't been made aware of any this morning. Topic 4, petitions and deputations. Also not aware of any. Move to item 5, which is the confirmation of minutes for the ordinary council meeting of the 13th of July. Would you like to move?
Move those, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Alan, seconded. They all speak at once.
Yes, I'm very happy to second the
Moved and
minutes.
seconded.
Very good minutes.
Are there any additions, changes, or alterations? I'm not hearing anybody. Any? So on that note, I will put the resolution. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no. Carried. Right, move to item 6, which is the adoption of committee resolutions. First up is the Otago South and Transport Committee. Lloyd, would you like to comment on the meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to move this these minutes. We had a very productive meeting. This meeting followed the workshop, and which we did in person in Dunedin, which was really constructive. So we've got some, as we reviewed the GPS for transport, it was very constructive in that process. But there are some common themes coming through. Bridges in Otago and Southland affected by floods that are a bit of an issue. There is some air quality reports that come through. We were asking for more information to get a better understanding of the effect of vehicles into public health, and also understanding some of the speed management processes that are in place and what they'll look like going forward. So we've got some plans in place for that over the next 2 to 3 years, but there's still some of the stuff is sort of more guidance than it is actual detail, Mr. Chairman. So we're just trying to nail that down to see what that looks like in real life. It looks like we'll be working alongside the TAs for some of the stuff. They will do the work and we'll put it into a report. So it's part of the process the government and Whakanatahi want to happen. So we're working on that to make it efficient, and Russell's and Gary all over it. So, is there any questions?
Any questions for Lloyd? If not, Alan, you're probably at the meeting. You want to second that resolution?
Yeah, second that, Mr. Chair.
Put the resolution. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right. Next up is the Southport Subcommittee meeting of the 15th of July. David, would you like to comment on the meeting?
There's probably not a lot to comment on, Mr. Chairman. I mean, it really was to do with directors' recruitment and succession planning, so most of the discussion took place under public excluded, so no doubt we'll have that discussion when we reach that stage. So I'm quite happy to move the resolution.
Second for that resolution. Lyndall, any further discussion? I will put the resolution. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Move to the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting of the 3rd of August.
We're happy to move, Mr. Chair, taken as read. There were no pivotal decisions made.
Thank you, Eric. Moved by Eric. Second for that resolution. Lyndall, further discussion? I will put the resolution. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to the Regulatory Committee meeting of the 3rd of August. Neville, would you like to comment on the meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take as read, there's a number of topics covered there which are relevant. The reporting of the nitrogen applications, it would be noted that the council is not invoicing the people for the supply of that data, which had been in the original intention. The winter flights have produced results that indicate that farmers are making an effort to be compliant and look after the environment. So there's been very few occasions when the council's flights have identified an area where the council need to visit and do a land inspection, which is good news. I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Any questions for Neville? Somebody like to second the resolution? David? All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to the Opec Performance and Audit Committee meeting of the 4th. Linda, would you like to comment on your meeting?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just to, excuse me, a number of reports noted. Significantly, I suppose, the changes to the vehicle procurement process and the motor vehicle policy. Always a hot topic of debate, those reports. And of course, to draw your attention to item 5, which was the appointment of our new staff member who we've met this morning. So that's the highlight. Good. Thanks very much. Happy to move that.
Thanks, Lyndall. Any questions for Lyndall? Seconded by Lloyd. We'll put the resolution. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to the Regional Services Committee of the 4th of August. Jeremy, would you like to comment on the meeting?
Yep, thanks, Chair. You can hear me all right?
Yep.
Yep, all good. Look, no, it was good. It was, I take it it's been read, but just a couple of points. Obviously, we had a report on the Environmental Enhancement Fund, which was great funding from MFE, and it certainly seems to be a lot of work being done on the ground in regards to maybe around the so-called SNAs of properties and bits and pieces. So, and I see this year being really, there's been a lot of projects being put forward for this year's project, so it's great to see the funding working really well in conjunction with the community. Another thing was just in regards to there was obviously a prosecution in the item, just in regards to the prosecution under the Fiordland Clean Vessel Passes. So it was good to see that some prosecutions are being done in regards to people sort of blatantly disregarding some of the rules. So important to keep Fiordland clean. And also we had got a good rundown. Obviously, it was the annual report on the security and biodiversity operations, which is very great to see all the good work that the team's doing, and yeah, they're doing an amazing job. So well done. So I'm happy to move that the minutes. Right?
Thanks, Jeremy. Moved by Jeremy, seconded for that report. Peter, any further discussion or questions?
David. It's indicated. No, it is. Oh, on. Waving.
Lloyd.
Mr. Chairman, in the minutes there's on page 48, there's a comment there, concern expressed by the Department of Conservation had lowered its annual contribution. I've actually picked that comment up in other places as well, that what they used to do and what they do now, their funding levels seem to go down and down and down. I'm wondering whether there's a bigger communication or conversation we need to have with DOC around doing this work together as a team. I know the liaison chairs made mention, Barry up there in Tiana made mention very specifically that what they used to do and what they do now, they are lifting the heavy amount of the weed control, and DOC is basically saying we're not contributing anything. I think it's a conversation we need to have.
In my view, that's not acceptable. We're supposed to be a good neighbour policy, and I think staff should elevate it to a higher level. And Doc and Linz are rather large landowners in Southland, and there should be an expectation that they take a responsible attitude.
Through you, Chair, I can confirm that I'm in the process of organising that meeting to start that conversation.
Thank you, Paul. So we get a seconder for that?
I can second it.
All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to the Opec meeting of the 11th of August. Linda, would you like to comment?
Given that most of that meeting was held in public, there's not much else I can say, apart from moving.
So moved by Linda,
I'll second it.
seconded by Lloyd. All in favour, will say aye. We have the Southport Subcommittee meeting of the 16th, which may be similar, David, if you have any comment.
Right, I was apologies.
Oh, you were, of course.
You were chairing it, so.
And Mr. Chairman, I was an apology too, so I
I'll move it.
And I'll second.
somebody
I will see it.
Right. Moved and seconded,
with my apology included, please.
with the amended apology list. Unfortunately, David wasn't well that day. I'll put the resolution, all in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to item 7, which is notification of extraordinary urgent business, supplementary reports or other. I'm not aware of any this morning. To item 8.
No, we've got a supplementary.
Oh, we do have, of course we do have a supplementary, actually, yes. So do we deal with that now, or do we just add it to the?
Just accept and review it.
I think we can just accept it into the agenda, yeah. If that's what we're doing, it's accepting it into the agenda, yes.
So would somebody like to move that we accept the
I'll
supplementary
move
report?
if you will.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Questions? I haven't been made aware of any questions this morning. So we'll move through to chairman's and councillors' reports. Yeah, just briefly, in the last month I attended the regional sector tour in the North Island. It's always a very good couple of days. You get on a bus with your fellow chairs, etc., and CEOs from around the district. It's always good to see what's happening in those areas. The first day we spent a time at Lake Taupo. I hadn't realised just what a complex of hydro schemes that run off that lake, and it was very interesting. And they were quite candid. They realised that the world's moved on, and some of them that have consents not coming up for renewal till 2037 are already beginning to have conversations with community, iwi and councils on the way forward. So that was quite interesting. Went down to one of the underground power schemes, and once you've been to one, it was a bit smaller than Manapori, but they all look much the same once you get down to that stage. But it was quite interesting just to see what's happening in that area. One of the other visits we had was to a Maori trust that was developed in the mid-1950s. Obviously, there was some innovative and strong personalities who convinced everyone to amalgamate their land into one unit, and they have been highly successful. They own the only private geothermal plant in New Zealand. They have quite a large dairy farm. They have 25 acres of greenhouses. And interesting, they found that initially they weren't performing that well. They actually have to release carbon dioxide into the complex to get the full efficiency. You're producing a wide range of products, associations with the Japanese, making a little thing with wasabi pills that apparently strengthen the clarity of mind, etc. But it was very interesting, and really, in that part of the world, it was quite obvious that they were taking their environmental responsibilities very strongly. Riparian plantings, wetlands have been fenced off, had their own worm farm. It was a very integrated system, and it was actually one of the highlights for me was actually to see what was happening in that part of the world, and highly successful. They looking at new innovations all the time. In fact, they had just started producing bottled hydrogen using excess power from the geothermal plant, and so they're looking for opportunities. They own the little dairy factory down the road. So it was very impressive, and you could see some old decaying houses that was just little blocks. Nobody made any money, and again, it's probably a great model for iwi actually to replicate connectively and the pride they had in what they were doing was really impressive. I didn't stay for the full regional tour. I was there for the regional conference. I was there for the first day and heard the Prime Minister speak, who had pains to say that they were not going to push forward local government reform, and we'd actually asked for it. I don't remember us actually asking for it. We did ask for money, but Ellen may want to speak on the rest of the conference when we get to. Well, I'll finish my report, then we'll hand over to you to say something on that. Regional sector last week, good meeting, last one before the elections. One of the innovations that is happening, and we've been talking about it down here and doing it on a South Island basis probably a bit sooner than everybody else, but there's a real appetite to work collaboratively together to have perhaps specialists. There've been a chief scientist that's been employed that can give specialist information. You know, obviously we're all going to have our own science teams, but more and more I think for efficiencies, if we can have a specialist in an area, whether it be consenting, whether it's science, IT, that looks like a lot more of the councils are going to be taking up the Rio Coco IT that we have been in for years. So there's some quite exciting things going on at the moment, and I think we all realise with what's being asked of us, we need to find ways of being more efficient and more joined up. Also attended, along with Peter, the Mid-Aparima meeting last week, Peter, but interesting questions. They're all keen to know what's happening on the environmental front and basically what they have to do. So you may want to comment later too. But I'll leave it there and ask, well, Alan, you may want to comment on that conference.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So Wednesday to Friday, it's a good conference. Around 600 or so delegates attended, and it's quite a busy 2 days of I guess a lot of listening and taking notes. An opportunity to obviously talk to other delegates and understand their issues. There's a reasonable number of third-party businesses who come along as well to, I guess, either make you aware of some of the things that they sell into the regional sector, into councils, and that was quite useful. But also, it is an opportunity to celebrate the industry, or celebrate the environment that we're in as far as local government, and the awards evening was well attended, and also like a very good night for an opportunity to celebrate. A lot of the environmental projects came up well. In fact, the Porirua City Council won the overall award for a planting regime on their waterways. So they've had Transmission Gully constructed, and a lot of sediment has gone into the estuary. They are concerned about it. They've had some joint funding from central government, but they're also putting a lot of money themselves in over a 20-year period to effectively riparian plant all the small tributaries that go into the Porirua Harbour. So it did have good environmental focus, not just perhaps some of the TA projects. But no, it was well attended, and enjoyed the opportunity to go there.
Thanks, Alan. Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Attended a field day this Monday up in Northern Southland of Farm Forestry Group, and a lot of talk around carbon farming, New Zealand units, a lot of unanswered questions, I can say, but just relating to what's happening around, and I'm starting to hear of farmers putting in significant size blocks on their property. And I note that we have Rod Carr, the chairman of the Climate Change Commission, coming into these chambers on the 6th. I think we need to actually construct some really careful questions to ask him, because with this group, they're very concerned around that advice going to the government on what that's going to affect and the potential general election next year. So whenever there is, just relaying what the group was sort of talking about, whenever there seems to be something big, the carbon price jumps up $10. So, you know, we need to come up with some good questions for the chairman when he comes up and talks to us. So, but really good, but just a lack of information and technical information on the ground.
I think the government appear to have backed off doing anything at a national level on carbon. We may well, in the next 12 months, need to get together with the District Council and see if we can put some sort of bylaw in that actually gives a bit of oversight. I've got Robert, then Big Lloyd, Lyndall.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My question was to Peter, and you kind of answered it in your last statement there, but I was wondering about your view on the depth of knowledge or understanding, both in the farming community and any commentators around pine forests in particular and their values, because watching these things online, it seems to me that the discussion's happening here, but there's a lot of information up here which is really pertinent that doesn't seem to be coming through, and I don't know if you have a sense of that.
Yeah, no, look, that's a fair comment. I would say one of the best rural commentators in this is Keith Woodford. He's done a series of commentaries in the last year all the way through, so he seems to be making sense of it, but certainly if you get onto the MPI pages and trawl your way through that, it just makes you more confused when you finish when you started. But there's all sorts of things they're talking about, selling units forward into the mid-2020s, the late 2020s, and all this sort of stuff that's just rapidly evolving. It sounds a bit crazy, but that's what they're talking about. So, yeah.
Lloyd.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had the Bluff Maritime Museum meeting last week. Just the usual issues that the state of the Monica, which is our west boat there, so there's ongoing maintenance with that and concern about its long-term viability, and issues with the building itself, which is aging and fairly lightly constructed, which has a few problems, and just boosting our profile is the other one. So anyone who's has the opportunity to advertise the Bluff Maritime Museum far and wide, please do so. That's about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Lloyd. Lyndall.
Thanks, Chairman. Just a question for Alan and perhaps you. Was there any new news or insight into the RMA changes in the future for local government? But also, were any of those sessions recorded so that we can go back to them and look at them?
So we have been sent links to most of those sessions. So if you would like to, for those links to be forwarded on, Minister Parker spoke, and I think some of that information would have been already in the arena, but I think some of it was a little bit new. I think Wilma did give us a wee bit of an update on that post attendance. But the links are available.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether they would be available only to registered attendees or whether we would all have access, because I was supposed to be there, obviously.
I'll forward them.
Yep, thank you.
Actually, on the first day, there was a futurist who was very, very interesting. Gave quite an insight into looking forward and looking back over the last 20 odd years. You have no idea what's coming. It was quite thought-provoking.
Okay, thanks.
There was a couple of things. I don't often get a chance, but I was invited to creating a good food map, an organisation that are working in Invercargill, and managed to get there for a couple of hours one afternoon with some quite innovative stuff going on, sort of setting up. The group I sat in with, could you have a virtual hub? And I think they're working on that sort of stuff. Robert, you'll be quite aware of some of that work, but the ability for people to be able to trade, link up, very keen on food resilience, etc. So it was actually quite an interesting meeting to actually attend. But Lloyd.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sort of make mention, I went to the Southern Peace Eradication Society's AGM last week, which was a constructive meeting, and they have received the contract from ES and are working now with their team to come back to us in the near future. So that was positive, and they look forward to, the three people came in, represented the group under here, but they're looking forward to furthering that relationship, so that was good. And then I met with yourself, Chairman, and the CEO yesterday with volunteer representatives. They came in and talked to us about what was on their minds and what the future work streams would look like between council and management. But one of the things we all decided to do would be good for the new council before Christmas was to come and talk to us so that we understand what's on their minds and how they want to work going forward and give an update. And you made a very good point, Mr. Chairman. There's a number of people that have heard about Ontario but have never actually been out on site. So there was an open willingness to have a site visit and just give a better understanding of what keeps them awake at night, but actually the dynamics of the site itself. So, and then there was a stronger working relationship to think about the future going forward and what issues would be risen and how would we work that through so that we've been proactive in the reconsenting process, has not been reactive to it. So constructive meeting. It was a pity we got cut short a bit, but yeah, it was 3/4 an hour of good discussion.
Thanks, Lloyd. Robert.
Thank you. If I could just ask Lloyd the obvious question. I do support your suggestion that the Fonterra reps come in here and address us. That'd be very good. So I'd like to ask them a question, and that's regarding the tonnage of CO2 that's coming out of their stack day and night. Do you think it's appropriate for me to ask that question at that meeting, and do they need to be pre-warned so that they can have the figure at the ready? And will you do that for me, please, as our intermediary person?
I think, if I may, as Mr. Chair, we will, if there's any questions that need to be advised beforehand, we can do that. And I think also they want to give a clear indication of some of the things they are thinking about as well. So that is one of the topics, is how do you reduce emissions and how do you work more efficiently? So it's quite a complicated field to be in, and some sites are better suited for changes than others. So yeah, it's a good question. So we can make sure that they're pre-warned about that. And I would expect that we do that through the staff contact. We did talk quite strongly about the interaction with the staff to the representatives and bringing together the Fonterra, if I said the national organisation with the local site. We need to see that as one. So Richard Gray will be closer to some of the discussions we have. So it's really good that they understand that. But they also made the point that there are things going forward that is probably more they're thinking about the future and how that actually looks, and they want to have those discussions earlier. So there'll be a interaction with management around some of that consenting processing and those sorts of things, but there also needs to be discussion around that with the council about some of the things that they're trying to do and work together and understand. So there's a commitment to make that happen.
I think it highlights the situation with a small population and the ability to partner with various organisations and industry good to get the environmental gains we want. There's some real potential there. I mean, going forward, I think we'll see industries actually offering a premium for people that are doing the right thing environmentally, and that's really powerful. It's much more powerful than a regulator waving a stick. And we saw with the progress we made on intensive winter grazing, the power of everybody working together and having the same message. Lloyd, you have
Mr. Chairman, I was just wondering about an update on the environmental awards. I put in a nomination and haven't heard a squeak, and we're now into the judging process. I thought there would be a process where you get informed that you have been nominated, and is there a time for judging, something like that? Maybe there's a miscommunication around that. Sort of a fiasco last year. I just hope it's not going to be repeated. Thank you.
somebody want to comment on that?
Yes, I guess I can, Chairman. I think fiasco is a bit of a harsh term, Councillor.
Harsh.
So we've judging has begun and all the nominees have been contacted by staff arranging visits and times. But were you the nominee or were you the nominator? So somebody should have been in touch with you, all the others have been contacted, so it's, I'll just check with the staff and see who they actually contacted from that group, but maybe that's a little bit too close for comfort. So we just have to be careful about the conflicts that we manage there, I think. Thanks.
Thanks, London. That's all reports. Right, we'll move to item 1, which is the Chief Executive's report. Will, would you like to comment on the report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will follow on from the already sort of well-canvassed local government conference, just to give you a few updates from my perspective. First of all, actually just to speak to Counsellor Ludlow's point, the videos that are online on the Local Government New Zealand website are not the videos of the plenary sessions. What I can do for you is send through, for some of those big sessions like Melissa Clark-Reynolds, who spoke on the first evening on futures, and the final speaker of the conference, Lucy Hone, who spoke on personal resilience. They have standard TED Talks which are available online. I can send those links through to those things. I'll send through the links to the Minister's speeches. I think I did send the link to the Minister for the Environment speech on the Beehive website, but also a recording snippet that I took of him for 15 minutes of his speech. But I can put something together for you again, specifically about that conference that leads to those areas for you, councillors, so that you've got them. So as not to talk about the same things that others have. I mean, from my perspective, the things that were interesting about the Local Government New Zealand conference were the fact that we did have some significant speeches from central government. The Minister for Local Government, Nanaia Mahuta, was at the conference for the entire conference, as far as I can see. I mean, the Prime Minister came, she spoke. Nanaia Mahuta spoke, Minister Nash spoke on tourism and development, and Minister for the Environment, David Parker, spoke also in extreme detail for the first time about where the direction of the legislation changes around the RM reforms was going. So it was a very detailed speech and nearly an hour long, and it is available on the Beehive website. I'll resend that link for you. In fact, it was such a detailed speech and so long that his colleague, Mr. Nash, made a bit of a joke about the fact he was going to reread it again as part of his speech. But, you know, I'd say that from my perspective, it was an extremely useful part of the conference because he really did set out the expectations from his perspective around what the reforms were going to deliver. There was a report from the local government panel. It's hard to tell at this stage exactly how that's going to play out. As the Chair said, the Prime Minister said that nothing's going to happen to the sector that we don't ask for ourselves. But in conversation, I think that the Department of Internal Affairs believes that we have asked for this ourselves, and as opposed to just asked for clarification around some of the levers related to funding, which I think is actually how this really initiated. So how that progresses is uncertain. Certainly there was a lot of conversation around what the different kinds of governance and democratic processes might look like, and that information I can send you the links to their website. The Future for Local Government panel's got quite a bit of information up there on that as well. I've been to a couple of other meetings that the Chair has also been present at, but the one that he wasn't was a central regional leadership group meeting, which happens the day before the regional chief executives group, where we meet as chief executives in the regional sector with the chief executives from central government. And one of the matters that was discussed at that meeting was around the future working relationship with iwi in the new regulatory environment. And it was interesting to traverse that because the regional sector, I think, has a much closer relationship with iwi in their regions, as you would expect, than central government agencies do. And so it was an interesting exchange of approach because I think the regional sector was actually able to give some advice to the central government agencies about how best to do this and to work together more collaboratively. So it's one where we are actually passing advice and information forward. at the regional services, at the regional chief executives group meeting, Te Uru Kahika, as the regional sector is now known, that conversation on Thursday last week traversed the obvious matters relating to sector reforms and the impact of the RM reforms on the sector. But in addition to that, there's also a significant increase in interest in sharing services where we can, and I think the Chair just mentioned that. So the regional, the RSHL body that was set up to share services around, primarily around our IRIS program, is now looking at how to actually expand that shared service capacity across some other areas. And this was traversed again the next day at the Regional Sector Group Chairs meeting, at which Chris Dorney, the Chief Scientist for the sector, talked about the need for us to be able to collaborate more effectively regionally where we've got limited resource, region by regional council. So looking at maybe streams of work where we can actually bring together the sector's power and knowledge to be more effective for all of us individually. There was also quite a good update from Bill Bayfield, the Chief Executive of Taumata Arawai, about pretty much the uncertainty that still exists between Taumata Arawai and the regional sector of the crossover in the regulatory space between themselves and us as we move through the existing Resource Management Act responsibilities, but also the reforms. So Taumata Arawai's regulatory responsibilities kick in October next year. And so there is a little bit of work to be done about where there is overlap between regional council's responsibilities and Taumata Arawai's responsibilities, particularly in relation to stormwater and wastewater. While it's quite clear that regional councils are the regulators, how those rules will actually play out needs a bit of work. So that was pretty much the conversation here, Mr. Chair. In relation to the rest of the report, there's a lot of information in this report. Just the highlights for that might well be, from a communications perspective, the work that's underway to ensure that we're connected to the community around the Matoba River Stop Bank matters that have been in the media in the last few days, and our need to be available to the community and to major groups, stakeholders, iwi in the region, to answer questions around where we're heading with that program of work to provide more certainty to the community about what the works will be. The Environment South and Community Awards had 30 nominations. I will pick up the matter that Counsellor Esler has raised and ensure that there is a response to that. And the judging is underway, as Counsellor Ludlow has just mentioned. In the policy and planning space, the surface water activity plan change in relation to Fiordland is still out for consultation, and that closes on the 29th of August. The public feedback on the draft freshwater visions for our regional policy statement has actually closed on the 19th of August and started working through that. I'm just going to click forward to a couple of other matters. I'm just wondering if Paul's got quite a substantial report this time for the Integrated Catch and Management Group. Is there anything specifically, Paul, you'd like to highlight for the councillors here? I wondered if some matters relating to biosecurity, perhaps, and the harbour management issues.
Yeah, good. So in terms of the carpet ceaseware or Delimitation inspection, the report speaks to delimitation surveys. That was conducted last week on Stewart Island, so we'll be coming back to you with the findings of those surveys. And also highlights that the dive have also done a controlled work on the Undaria infestation at Easy Harbour. And again, the outcome of that will bring to a future meeting. Also, probably worth highlighting that we continue to work with our regional council colleagues in Otago and Environment Canterbury around the intensive integrated consents, and the end of those conversations is to be as aligned and as streamlined as possible, noting though there are different plans and provisions in place across the region. always good to highlight that we're 100% compliant with our processing timeframes, and so that's our consent management team. And also highlighting that the third and final flight for the season was carried out on the 12th of August around intensive winter grazing. No breaches were confirmed. However, some advice has been provided holds. With regards to Whakama Te Waituna, just to highlight that a communication consultant has now been contracted to engage and develop the communication engagement plan for Waituna, which is really important. And just finally, I think this has been mentioned before, but the Harbour Master needed to issue a instruction with regards to debris that was coming from the waterfalls that struck 2 vessels, and so that direction now means that there needs to be a 50 metres minimum standoff distance from all waterfalls in Fiordland. So that was take that mindset into use.
Thank you. Just wanted to also highlight a couple of matters that are in different parts of the report. That the work that's underway in the physiographic and geotechnical area, there's a report here about our funding, which is interestingly also through Kānoa and in collaboration with Genius Science, to do the airborne electromagnetic survey work, and that is underway. And also the LiDAR raw data report on page 65 of in the Lower Mataura catchment is pretty much going to be finished in the next month and going to be heading off to LINS for their analysis and their publication. So that work is very critical to us, as you councillors have been briefed on some of the work that's underway in this organisation for that, and that is just 2 updates on that. In the corporate area, there's quite a lot of work going on in the digitisation of our records, which sounds like maybe not an important matter, but when you consider how many of our records are actually still in paper and what that means for us in terms of finding information, getting our records into a digital state is going to improve our capacity to respond not only to our own requirements but to the public's requests for information. There's also the business case work ongoing in relation to the next generation of IRIS, which is our major regional information system that we share nationally with the rest of the sector. That business case is in development. And Amy, do you want to just comment a bit more about that and where we're at with IRIS next year?
So we're at the process at the moment, regionally, engaging with each of the different councils to get their agreement to the documentation, to the MOU that relates to it. It's I think it's a bit of an iterative process with, for RSHL, given that we are all, whilst we're all the same, we're all uniquely different in our own way as well. So those are the conversations that are going on. Documentation's been issued around the MOU, which each council is responding on. Clearly there needs to be a critical mass of councils that will sign up to the development of the next generation, IRIS next generation product, which makes it financially viable. So actually those conversations are happening at the moment. And again, just reflecting the benefit of us all coming together as a group in order to be able to fund something for the collective benefit that as an individual council would cost us a considerable amount more to do by ourselves.
So those are the highlights, Chair, but I've taken
Right,
your
I've got a
questions.
number of questions. I've got Alan, Robert, David, then Lindor. Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So I was just looking on page 59, and just asking really the work that's been going underway with this next airborne electromagnetic survey. How does that vary to the survey that we did about 5 or 6 years ago, which was handled by Great South, which seemed to be an electromagnetic survey as well? So what's the difference, and or why are we doing it again? Or you may have an answer for that.
I think Rachel might be able to speak to that.
In his absence, I can comment that it's really around defining the edges of the aquifers, so builds on from the work that was done a few years ago, and that the organisations are working with Great South as well. So it's happening at a different level. But we have got a workshop planned with councillors on the 6th of September where the experts will be in the room and we can cover that in some more detail for you.
Right, thank you.
Robert?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to say that Alan's questions are very good one. I was puzzling over there too. Thank you for your very comprehensive report. There's a lot in that. My question is a trifle, which may surprise you, but you talk about media inquiries, and one of them being on the topic of swimmers in Te Anau. Was the question, are they crazy? or actually, to put it another way, what were they asking?
Oh, I don't want to misspeak on this, but there were matters relating to harbour safety, and Lyndon can talk to this, that swimmers were likely to be in harm's way from vessels. Do you want to just have a...
I only ask because I follow a group who swim in the lake regularly, and I have never heard from them that there are any issues.
In the harbour.
Lyndon, you'll know.
Morning to you, Mr. Chair. I've engaged with the Te Anau Open Water Group probably about 5 months ago, and again just recently with the Fuel and Community Board around the issues, particularly around the passive recreation areas. So it's quite complicated. Department of Conservation, they have an on-water passive recreation area that covers out to 200 metres from the shoreline, and that was part of their National Park Plan. Unfortunately, the Department of Conservation don't regulate or monitor their self-imposed passive recreation area, and the District Council or the Fuel and Community Board put in a separate passive recreation area from the shoreline that covers from the yacht club right around the 2 wings over water. So the problem we have there is that two different entities that have put in separate passive recreation areas, and of course we have a mixture of Te Anau open water swimmers that like to swim on Steamers Beach along the front, but apart from our normal boating safety work in those areas, we recommend to vessels to keep out of the way there, but the swimmers seem to particularly like swimming down there close to the dock information centre corner, right where the boat ramp is, and of course they're putting themselves at harm's way, and they're becoming increasingly frustrated about vessels coming and going, but I've had to remind them on a number of occasions that it is quite a dynamic area, and there is a boat ramp there, so you can expect vessels to be coming and going from there all the time. Next week I'm meeting with Fuel and Community Board.
Perhaps they could wear fluoro caps.
And that has been part of my suggestion to the open water swimmers to wear high vis and also carry a float which they put around connected themselves to make themselves more visible in the water. And I suggested that probably not a clever idea to swim down there by the boat ramp. There are plenty of other places where they can swim safely. And as part of our ongoing boating safety campaign last year, and we'll do it again this year, we've been reminding boaties at the boat ramps to maintain that all-round lookout and in particular keep a lookout for swimmers in the water. It is ongoing, and it's quite frustrating. The Department of Conservation are saying, well, we don't regulate the on-water passive recreation area that's up to Environment Southland, but there's nothing in our bylaws about that. So we, apart from recommending, that's as far as we've gone so far.
Thank you very much.
So not so true.
David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan's actually asked part of the questions just regards that AEM survey, but I understand, and Adrian, I see she just left the room, but in talking to her, I understand that survey, the flyovers are reasonably low, and in fact quite low. So I picked up that information. So we have to communicate, and I'm pleased that there's a workshop coming up to communicate with the community in that area up there, because obviously stock movement and whatever takes place at the time.
Sure.
Busy time of the year, whenever I'm not quite sure when it's going to start, but no, it's pretty important. I understand it could even be as low as 50 metres, which is going to test out some of the higher trees in the area also. So just that communication with the community. Yeah.
Sure, it's 200 metres.
I don't think that it's 50, but I can come back and report on that, but it's certainly, it's due to start in October.
So is it drones or fixed wing or?
Helicopter, from what I understand. Yeah. No, Adrian contacted myself and Linda Preston, I think, just to get an idea of the best time of the year. But for the extensive country, certainly that would be a busy time of the year, but I don't think it's going to pick that up.
Well, we can come back, I'll write to you on Tuesday with more information on this.
Lyndall.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Not a question, just a compliment. Actually, I attended the Catchment Liaison Committee meeting, Chair's meeting last week, and I was really impressed by the professional presentations and conduct and obvious knowledge of our staff who spoke at the gathering. And the stand-in chairman did an excellent job. At short notice, I believe. But yeah, I just wanted to pay the compliment to the staff because actually they were very professional and informed and did a good job of being clear and concise.
Eric.
Yeah, look, I was thinking for a fulsome report. I was kind of drawn to the consent applications on page 62, particularly this, I think you say Sulin or the oyster one. And it raised a whole lot of questions for me. Where is the sort of landscape with that? And is MPI lifted or whomever put the embargo on any development down there? And is this a bit of a test to see if that can be lifted or is it lifted? And what it actually might mean in terms of consents going forward, source of spat. I understand that the likelihood of the contamination in the Big Glory Bay stuff in the past was from imported spat, so what are the rules around that? What do we have in terms of expert witnesses going forward? And then there are issues like there is a natural, like current spatting arrangement going naturally into Horseshoe Bay, and is someone trying to capture that for themselves by putting in one there? There's just a raft of questions around that. So basically, where's the landscape? Have we got staff or expert witnesses up to deal with this before it actually happens?
I might quite a lot of questions, Councillor, so I'll be brief as well.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the Surveillance Properties has been in the system for quite some time with our organisation. We've put on several reports. That's effectively a consortium of two long-term operators in the area of the district. Look to establish some area and reports from there. We would like to look at is, as you've indicated, the legislative interrelationship between agriculture and biosecurity legislation and the RMA is quite confused. And we've had some ongoing dialogue with the people, biosecurity people around when is the appropriate time to progress this application to a resource consent stage. It's heading likely to need a hearing, and it could be a single-day hearing, which is, I'm sure you're aware, quite a significant potential cost to the applicants. So it's been on hold for a while we sort of clarify that legislative framework, because we don't want to put people through a process of attempting to obtain a resource consent and then find that they can't get it for some other alternative legislative reason. So that's where things are sitting at the moment.
Thank you. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Amy, have we got a number, and I'm thinking for the second generation development of Iris, have we got a number to proceed forward, or are we still at risk that we may not get that critical mass?
Are you talking number of councils or financial number as to cost?
Number of councils number of councils that would need to be on board to make this work stream happen.
I'm currently in conversation with 11 councils. In terms of what's the break even, I think that's I don't think they can answer that because that depends on the individual appetite of each council to the extent of how much they're willing to pay. So that, again, it speaks to the iterative point. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule. You know, you might have one large council that was, unlikely, but for the purposes of illustration, one large council would go, yes, we pay for the whole thing. Unlikely, but so yeah, I think that depends. It's about working out at this stage how many might want to come to the party on the basis of what we know and understand the cost might look like from 11 councils, and then if those councils don't, if those full 11 don't participate, then it's going back, like I said, in an iterative way, to say, hey, look, we've only got 10 or 9, this is what it does to the distribution of costs, is everybody still in?
So it's where they're at in the business case development at the moment, is business case development.
Mr. Chairman, I suppose my previous life I've had a little bit to do with this, but I am concerned that if we don't get this right, the backup plan is not very nice because it's not an off-the-shelf program that we can use. But in saying that, there are a number of systems that need to be probably changed or modified within the greater 11 councils that would make it a lot easier. And I'm probably looking through that and saying, we know that staff shift from one council to another. We know that we're working together far better in the background and we want to do that. So a simplified system that covers a big range of things is ideal. So I just want to make sure that people understand that this is quite sensitive in some respects, but we can't just have a council saying we're only going to do it my way or no way. Some of the German systems are very much, we have our system and you have to change to make it work. So we need to break down some of those barriers. Otherwise, we're not going to get what we want and we're going to struggle with a system that is running out of capacity.
I mean, there's a serious commitment from the regional CEOs to advance how both NextGen Iris and also RSH will work, and to ensure that the governance arrangements and business cases are tidy. So it's, yeah, Amy.
Sorry, and just to add to that, look,
Mr. Chairman, we've had a chat from Jeremy saying staff speaking from the back of the room aren't audible on our Zoom people. Could they come forward?
Good point, I see.
apologies.
Here you go, Jeremy.
Thank you, apologies. So just further to that, there's probably two things that I'd like to add. One, there has been, and we've talked about it through Opec and through the council, quite a comprehensive amount of work done on this to get to this point over a large amount of time in terms of the due diligence and reflecting your point about the need collectively to come to the party and the benefit of doing so. There has been quite a bit of work, not just on the software solution itself, but working through the SIG network to develop a suite of common practices around the core activities that we all do as regional councils. And those things are progressing in parallel, and they, the benefit of implementing the software, comes with a common practice and vice versa. So there's that. And then to your point as well, in terms of getting everybody around the table, I think it's important to note that the original Iris software was developed by 6 shareholding councils, and we now have 11 that have come to the party. And the RSH business plan, speaks to the need to continue the dialogue with those councils who are not yet around the table to see if we can get them on board in the coming period of time.
Well, I'm looking at you, Jeremy. If anybody online having a question, you're okay. Lyndall, then myself.
Thanks, Chairman. It was just to ask the staff to step forward into the chair so that we can all hear them. So, job done. Thank you.
Just looking at the that biodiversity funding, which the leverage is really good. We've $1 million of private money going in, so that's really good stuff to see that we won't always have this amount of money, but we can obviously going to make some real progress with almost 1.3 million but over $1 million in actual contributions from the applicants, so that's good to see. If there's no further questions on the report, moved by Neville, seconded by Lloyd, all in favour will say aye. Aye. Right, we'll move to item 2, which is the Counsellor Code of Conduct.
The purpose of this item was to allow Council to consider a revised Councillor Code of Conduct. The existing Code of Conduct sits within the Council's governance policies, and there is a copy appended. And you'll see it's quite outdated. It's been a number of years and a number of terms of council with it hasn't been looked at. And there's been a number of councils around the country who have revised their codes of conduct, and LGNZ had put out a template based on best practice, which the revised code has been used to set the scene for this code of conduct. It has also taken into account recommendations that Otago Regional Council took on board as a result of recent experiences and advice they received from Bruce Robertson, who sits on the committee. And we have also, the changes provide greater clarity in format. They set out the values that councillors will bring when dealing with these, bring to their role and their conduct in the chamber and outside of the chamber. It also applies now to appointed members as well as elected members. The current code doesn't apply to appointed members because at the time we didn't have appointed members when they were appointed on. It also did not. It also brings into the new local government pecuniary interest register. That legislation has been passed on the 20th of May this year, but doesn't come into effect until the 20th of November. There may be more guidance out on that, but at the moment we have just referenced it and brought it into the code, because there is separate information that will have to come out about that and the implications it has for council and new processes and new forms that you'll need to complete following the next election. And it also sets out the proposed way of dealing with complaints, which wasn't explicit within the existing code. There was some guidance, but this the new approach sets out a very specific way of handling complaints, a panel being set up and how they'll be addressed. And it's taking it away from other councillors necessarily having to deal with them by appointing independent people who would be called on if required. So it also connects to existing councillor protocols that we have that deal with councillor communications in a general way and councillor communications through the media. They're not referenced in the current code. They're protocols that sit separately, but they're under the revised code. That is the approach. It links those documents and makes reference to them, so they'll be combined in one place.
Thanks for that, Jan. Any questions at this stage? Lloyd.
Mr. Chairman, I raised this earlier on, but my view is I think we do need to update this. It's fine, it's too old. But I think my concern is that staff have done their best, but we haven't actually discussed this as a council. And I raised a number of authority lines, the iwi and DOC representatives that we have now. And I really wanted a ability to throw some dynamics at it, to actually understand, does it actually do what we want it to do? It might read very well, but when you deal with the extreme cases, and we've seen some of them in the media, I'd actually quite like to test that before we actually formally approved it. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm suggesting that we note the report and that we actually workshop it to come back after the council have had a discussion with staff, is what my recommendation would be.
No, I think that's a good suggestion, because at the end of the day, this is an area that has been vague, and governments have to own a code of conduct. Eric.
Yeah, well, similar question. So I haven't had time to do the homework on this myself, but really, where does this sit beside our standing orders. And codes of conduct normally are subservient to standing orders. And you just need to work this through and make sure that there aren't any anomalies where things can be ambiguous. And I haven't done it, but I'd like someone even cleverer than me to do it and make sure that it does actually work when you have a crisis in that regard.
Any further comments at this stage? I think, we've seen around the countryside that code of conducts in the past have been reasonably toothless if you get individuals who simply ignore them. So it's something I think we do need to take a little bit of time. At the end of the day, if your government's actually approve something themselves, there's probably a bit more ownership, and I think that's probably a good way for this to land. There's sensible stuff.
Add another point, that the points that Lloyd raised, do they need to be included in our standing orders as well, about the other people we now embraced into the various committees and onto this council? We have someone have a look at that as well, and probably someone with a legal mind. Right.
So of course, that is one of the changes, that we now have appointed members as well as elected. Media, it's changed over the time. But I think, would you like to move that?
I'm happy to move that, Mr. Chairman.
And I'll second.
Can we just clarify what the recommendation is, please?
Noting the report, but doing the work.
Noting the report and referring the matter to a council workshop.
We're all clear on that motion? Any further discussion? I will put that motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no. Carried.
That's very much common sense.
You're right.
Right, we'll move to item 3, which is update to the staff delegations manual.
Let's try to catch your eye. Yeah.
Constant round of changes. It's a further update to the staff delegations manual, and it's to take into account changes within the people and capability delegations. It needs to update to reflect the General Manager's Tier 2 approval to undertake like-for-like recruitment and sign offers of employment, without being subject to conversations with the Chief Executive. This just cuts out a layer of bureaucracy, really. If there are any new roles or substantive changes, they would have to be approved by the Chief Executive before they were considered. And so this is just allowing, if somebody resigns tomorrow, you can put in start the recruitment process for that person if there are to be no changes to the role. And the dam management functions, there's been a change in the catchment team. We no longer have an engineer on staff, so we're just making changes to reflect that in the delegations policy, and that a suitably qualified engineer would be contracted to do that work. And financial delegations just being updated to reflect changes in job titles in the science strategy and investigations team.
Chairman.
Moved, seconded, fairly straightforward.
Mr. Chairman, I'm quite happy to second this, but I think it raises a bigger question, and that is probably more of a global view on all these changes, to make sure that we as an organisation, our structure is actually performing in the way that we want to. And I say that we're using outside consultants where we have deficiencies, that's not a problem, but we probably need to get a bigger view of that at some stage to make sure that we have the capability in-house where we need it, but we're happy to contract because it is something that is specific, and we're getting more and more specific stuff now, and the council's fully aware of that framework, and it's a bigger global sense than just the 3 matters that we're dealing with today.
Yes, so this just relates to business processes in relation to where matters go and the names of people's
That's right.
titles in the organisation. The other matter you're talking about is exactly the conversation that should be before the Opec committee in relation to the way the organisation functions and its productive delivery. Yep.
Some of these acts go back quite some way. I see one was 1908. It's been here for a while.
Yes, it's going back, isn't it?
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? I'll put the motion. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
So carried. Okay, we'll move to item 4, which is the councillors' meeting schedule.
And there have been a couple of changes to the schedule, needless to say, since it was issued. The Aliti Catchment Liaison Tour, I believe they're settling on the date of the Monday, the 5th of September, and using the 7th of September as a backup date if needed. So I did send out information about that tour, but I will reconfirm it for you all and get confirmation stuff into the we were to have had a council risk workshop today. That has now been moved to 14th of September. Change the time
I see I'm down for leave of absence now, which obviously is not happening, but I would like to request the 5th of September. I've actually been in Wellington that day. Are there any other requests for leave? David?
From the 13th to the 17th of September. Thanks.
Not for leave, Jim, I just note on the 19th, Councillor Esler and I attended the Bluff Museum meeting on behalf of Council. I left the papers from that meeting with Ken.
Any further additions or amendments to the meeting schedule? If not, would somebody like to move?
So moved.
Moved by Alan, seconded by David. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Right, so we've got item 5, reporting of commitments entered into above the delegated authority.
And this is another item that's required by Council's Delegations Manual, and it's reporting of contracts or commitments entered into by the General Manager, a General Manager and the Chief Executive, exceeding their delegations, which is a joint delegation of 300,000. So the contracts on this occasion were entered into Stantec New Zealand for services in connection with draw stop banks amounting to $545,988. Stantec New Zealand for services in connection with wind and stop banks amounting to $431,233. And the ANZ Bank seasonal overdraft facility, that can go up to a total of $5 million. So it has previously been reported to Council that that was being entered into. This is the formal reporting that it has been entered into.
Any questions on this item?
I'll move the recommendation, Chairman. We were aware of those activities and the likely expenditure.
Moved by Neville, seconded by Lloyd. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to item 6, which is the Commerce Seal. Very quick out of the box, moved by Eric. Seconded by David. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Right, that will not wait, we will now do the extraordinary, supplementary. So Lucy, would you like to come forward and comment on the Environmental Committee response?
I have to find out why we need to do it.
Well, we're not moving any of this was the supplementary paper that we actually approved earlier, so it's just coming up before we go to, so we're not going to public session at the stage, we're still in public.
Thank you. The
The supplementary report before you relates to the Environment Select Committee request for a response to the petition by Paul Marshall in regards to the YL and the use of the exclusion that exists with the MPSFM for the Manapuri scheme. The Environment Select Committee was presented the petition and then subsequently asked us to provide some written evidence on 4 specific matters. So that response is drafted and attached to your paper. I do have a couple of additions that I'm happy to read out, but Chair, I didn't know if you'd like me to answer any questions before I do that.
Perhaps read that bit out first, then you get all the questions at once.
So additional paragraphs that were being proposed at the back, the last paragraph of the draft letter that's with you in terms of the Council's views on the exemption clause. There's an insertion of a couple of clarifying points in terms of the work that's already been undertaken by Council in regard to taking views on the state of the wire. So I propose to include these 3 sentences, so bear with me whilst I just read through those. And these would be inserted after reference to plan change to Atahi in that paragraph. As part of the limit setting process, Environment Southland, along with our partners Te Marama, which is the environmental arm of Ngaitahi Te Urihiku, have identified the community's values and jointly developed draft freshwater objectives. These draft freshwater objectives were endorsed by Council and the Te Marama Board in November 2020 and outline the Council's intent to achieve a state of order across Southland and to give effect to Te Mana o Te Wai. Additionally, the Council and TAMI have compiled and recently consulted the community on draft freshwater visions as required by the MPSFM 2020. And for the Waiau, the goal is the restoration of a state of order by 2045 to the fullest extent possible, whilst acknowledging the Manapuri power scheme. The next steps of our limit setting process will advance with those guiding goals. So through you, Chair, happy to answer any further questions or any questions at all that Council may have.
Lloyd.
Chairman, just minor thing, you've got in the very opening paragraph, save out Waiau River. Should you save Waiau River from Paul Marshall? Chairman, I'm just wondering, under point 1, it talks about its flows. I didn't see anything here that talked about it talks about the regional forum work. Do we need to talk about the flows? Because there is a great reduction in the flows by going to the Manapuri Pair scheme. There is talked about being flow managed at maybe up to 4 times a year, but there's some stuff in here I probably was looking for but didn't actually see. And what does that mean to the river? I think without going too much overboard, I'm not totally convinced that we've actually landed what the Select Committee is actually looking for, and some of the stuff you've given us gives a bit more strength, but we're relying on the forums work, but the forums work is really only advice to us. It's not actually actual, if I said that respectively to the forum. It's a working document that we haven't actually landed on yet. So while the interest background information they have seen, we actually haven't given it formal locked and loaded into plans yet. So I'm just wondering whether some of that stuff there is actually, we are clear enough where we are. Like point 4, we always knew that it didn't matter where the matters sit, there was always going to be opposition, but I don't think in that paper we've actually clearly explained that there is, if we went down this track, what was the regime? If we went down that track, what was the outcome? Yeah. But I think we were waiting on the Environment Court. The short answer, we wait on the Environment Court to give us guidance on this stuff. So maybe your response is more appropriate than I'm looking for more than what's there. So I think, do we need to reinforce the Environment Court? This is under review by the Environment Court, and we need to make sure that we don't do anything here, even through the Select Committee, that's actually going to interfere with that process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Eric.
Just following up on that, there's a lot of anecdotal stories out there about what we need to do to actually fix this. And I monitor that flow site quite regularly. So, for example, I don't know what's required to fix it. I don't know if we've got the information to know. In the last fortnight, the variation of the flow of the river at the Waiau Bridge has been over 300 cubics. there are natural flushes occurring. And do we know what happens when that happens? And just talking about minimum flows and regular flushing, I'm actually not convinced we know what the solution is. And somehow we need to kind of capture that rather than to be, just say, this is the solution for me anyway.
And I guess at the moment, Meridian have a consent that operates till 2031. The recommendations from a regional forum at the moment, flushing flows are voluntary. They're suggesting that they should be mandatory. The other one I'm looking at is the controlled activity status. It's certainly something that we know with changes to the RMA. In response to questioning of one of the experts, they suggested that control may look more like restricted discretionary going forward. And I guess there's probably a concern that a discretionary activity as it stands is one we cannot turn down. Whether we need anything at this stage, but we do talk about the paragraph down on page 5 about Rule 52A and which provides controlled activity status. And I know that certainly has been something of a controversy, and with now having the MPS for freshwater 2020, which is really very much based on Melbourne's to the Sea and Aurora, etc. Whether that's still relevant or where does that fit in, and just replying to the Select Committee. Lord.
There's one other, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, sorry, when I read this, I'm just going, those were the 4 questions. Have we actually given the right information or enough information to give them confidence to answer the request of, well, the follow-up what Paul Marshall has done on his behalf? Do we actually need to put in here the timetable of the consenting and reconsenting applications and what they're about? Because some of the issues what's happening is some of the stuff is trying to be pulled forward, but there is actually a process in place for those things to happen. And maybe the Select Committee need to understand there are some milestones along this timeline that some of the stuff is going to be addressed.
Yeah, I'd like to comment. So, I think what's critical in going before Select Committee councillors is you can only comment on what the current state actually is. So we can't really speculate on the future at this point. Question 1, which is answered under the status under the current regional planning regime, is the current state. And I think that, you know, the final paragraph in that answer, maybe if you broke out, Lucy, the second half of that paragraph about the Environment Court hearing appeals a little bit more clearly, it may provide that clarity about where we are in this process. The Select Committee just really wants to understand information as it currently exists. And I think that, you know, this has had the lens of our legal advice over it to ensure that we're not flying any kites in our response to the Select Committee where Council has not formed a view. And I think that quite properly what Lucy is proposing we add to the final question, which is our views on the MPSFM exemption clause, does form the views that Council has currently taken forward. I'm not sure how much further we can talk into the future when you're yet to have those conversations in finality.
Through you, Chair, just add to, I agree with Wilma entirely, and I think the only other part that I would have comfort in adding to Councillor McCallum's point is that timetable of current consents, because I think we haven't included that, and that's a safe thing to refer to because it is as part of, to Wilma's point, it is the current state, and I think that would assist the Select Committee to understand there are to come.
Yeah.
The timeframe.
So
So
we
I
can
can definitely add that as part of that.
Yeah, we can be clear about that, and you would add that into the answer to the first question. One of the other things that Lucy and I did discuss, we needed to get this paper to you councillors so that it could actually be on this agenda. And we talked about how this was formatted. It needs to be formatted so that it's clear which of these subheadings we are actually replying to, which question. And also I think it needs to have some sort of like sub-subheadings so that the points are clearer. Lucy will do that before it goes to the select committee. Mr Chair, just thinking of the way to take this forward so that council's approved it to go. Do you need to see this again? How much time do we have since we've asked for an extension of time to the select committees to meet this meeting?
Possibly, we've forwarded the amended version and very short, a number of hours. If anybody had a problem, they could contact. At least that means we've seen it. I think we're getting pretty close with what we've got here now. And just for clarification, that piece that Lucy put round it, it's on that second last paragraph after tuatahi, and then the bottom paragraph is the existing one that carries on. So we're all clear on that?
We need a motion, Chairman, that we acknowledge the work the staff put into this and the response subject to the discussion today.
Yes, and that we just suggest that Lucy sends an update to this later, maybe for overnight review, because it needs to go to the select committee tomorrow, is that correct?
Deadline Friday, 5.
Have you add that to your motion?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Second to that motion? Any further discussion? I'll put the motion, all in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no, carried. And that will complete the public section of the meeting today.
That one, yeah, thank you.
Right, would somebody like to, well, maybe we need to have the reasons why we need to go into public exclusion first, then I'll ask for a move.
To prevent the disclosure or use of official information for improper gain or advantage, to allow council to carry out commercial activities, including commercial and industrial, without prejudice or disadvantage.
Heard those reasons, would somebody like to move into public excluded? Moved by David, seconded by Lloyd. All in favour will say aye. Aye.